Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to Beyond Words, Time of the Writer. My name is Lebo Mashile, and I have the privilege of facilitating this evening's discussion, which is called Outracing Beyond Words. We've got three very accomplished writers with us. Unfortunately, one of our authors couldn't be with us. Bernardo Carvalho, unfortunately, can't be with us due to a family commitment. But we have three award-winning, multi-talented authors who are with us this evening, representing Brazil and South Africa and Nigeria, three powerhouse countries that make a huge impact kind of politically and culturally in our world and on the respective continents where these countries are located. So we're going to use the work of these authors as a way to speak about identity, about race, which are issues that come up in everyone's work. So I'll start by introducing you to Cheluchi Onyemelukwe-Onuobia, who is a lawyer and an academic, and she's considered one of Nigeria's brightest literary talents. Her work was actually first published in South Africa by Penguin in 2019. Her debut novel, The Son of the House, won the Best International Fiction Book Award at the Sharjah International Book Fair. She's coming to us today from Lagos. Welcome, Cheluchi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lebo.
And then we are going to travel to Lisbon by way of Rio. We have Tatiana Salem Levy, who is a writer, an essayist, and a researcher at Universidade Nova de Lisboa, the University of Lisbon. Her first novel, The House in Smyrna, won Brazil's most generous literary award, the São Paulo Prize for literature for debut work. But she has written 4 novels, she's written essays, she's written children's books, and she's got a new novel that's coming out, and the English publication will be coming out in August, which speaks about gender and speaks about rape. We'll be speaking to her about that. Welcome from Lisbon, Tatiana.
Thank you, Lebo.
Good afternoon to you. And coming to us from the mother city, from Cape Town, Ivan Johnson. Ivan Johnson is a memoir of a South African identity crisis. He speaks so well, is a revelation about the high-spirited boy from a close-knit family on the Cape Flats coming of age amid the turmoil of the struggle to join a lily-white advertising industry. His tale is told with flair and irreverence. So he straddles 2 worlds, the world of literature and the world of advertising, but they're not that far apart either. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you, Lebo, and thank you for having me at the festival. I'm honored. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Cheluchi, I'd like to start with you, and I guess I'll ask the first question that I'd like to ask each of you is just maybe very quickly, like, describe what are the themes that come out, that keep coming back in your work, you know? What is it that brought you to writing in the first place? And what is it that you keep coming back to when you write?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. And maybe one that takes a little thinking about. But I think, first of all, I'm a lawyer and I do other things, and I do them at very different levels that make people kind of wonder why I write at all. But writing is what I've always wanted to do because of storytelling. So I grew up around a lot of storytelling. My father told us a lot of stories growing up, and what they did was, make you see people differently, make you see situations and circumstances differently, and make you wear other people's eyes and clothes and shoes and walk in them. And in a sense, that's sort of what I do in my work. My debut novel which is called The Son of the House, is actually about 2 women. And so if you had asked me years ago, I would never have imagined myself writing about women. And I think I come to that from the perspective that I always just wanted to just live in the world and just be, but then you live and you move through the world and you realize that, well, everybody else sees you as a woman and is going to treat you somewhat differently, sometimes interestingly because of that. And so I look at two women's stories. The book is about two women telling themselves the stories of their lives. So in a sense, I think I come to my writing from that perspective. I do a lot of factual things in other parts of my life, but in my writing, I want to tell a story. So I want to use allegories. I want to use pictures to tell people different things, to get people to think about different things, really. To get myself, not always any other person, to think about life differently and to, in a sense, look inwards. And I think that's what my books, I'm working on my second book now, and there's quite a bit of that sort of thing, even though now it's not necessarily about gender as this book is.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that, that many times people will look at the life experience of a writer and think that, this person has been through this, so this is what you bring to the page or to your craft. Yeah. But many times you're figuring it out while you are creating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In writing this book as well, I mean, I wrote it for Nigeria. I wrote it for not just Nigeria, for the part of Nigeria that I am from. I'm Igbo, from the eastern part of Nigeria. And it was very much, looking inwards. And the question was, who would ever want to publish this book? I remember my husband reading it and saying, there's so many Igbo words in it. Who is going to read that? But I mean, it's gone out into the world and done quite well. And, it was shortlisted for the Gila Prize in Canada, which is their biggest literary prize and all of that. And one of the things that tells me, and of course, we're talking about the Sharjah Prize and all of that. One of the things that it tells me is that we're all human. And that's sort of, I'm sure we're going to get deep into it in this conversation. And that stories move us, and that we are, beyond all the other things that we like to, look at and discriminate based on, and all of that. That at bottom, at base, we're essentially human, and we want, for the most part, almost the same things, right? And so people across have read it. In Nigeria, where we're all different. So this speaks to the Igbo part, but other people have rallied around it and been able to get it, quote and unquote, and so on. And yeah, like you said, it was first picked up by Penguin in South Africa after Nigerian publishers had rejected it repeatedly. So again, I think that's, I'm hoping, I'm looking forward to what every other person is going to be saying. But yeah, that idea that at bottom we're all sort of looking for the same things, for similar things, as human beings, is something that drives my writing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I mean, no one really questions that about work from the West, whether it's universal or not.
Yes,
we grow up reading literature, we grow up reading Shakespeare or Keats or whatever we're exposed to, and no one questions whether whether I'll be able to find myself as a human being. Why should it be a question whether I can find myself in in Igbo land, or whether I can find myself in Cape Town as a young colored boy growing up during the struggle? I'd like to come to you, Ivan, now and speak to you about how you came to writing your novel. I love the title. He speaks so well.
He speaks well. Yeah.
He speaks well. Any person who has, had to move through a post-colonial society, either school or work, these power structures where we have to code switch as people of color, and you learn how to speak the colonial language, you speak it like it's your mother tongue, and then it's like, oh, ooh, where did you come from? So where did you come from, Ivan, and how did you come to writing?
Well, it is a long anecdotal story, but I always have fun telling it because, like you know, I'm an ad man first. I'm a creative, right? So I'm a creative partner in my own advertising agency. You know, I started as art director. I used to be an art director. I used to draw stuff, yeah, visualize stuff, conceptualize stuff. But as I got into my career to write more, because I became more senior to oversee work and oversee writers, I started writing myself and writing more, wrote TV ads, radio ads, and won all over the world. But I never intended becoming a writer. I know lots of advertising people always have the novel, you know, that they're going to write one day, or the movie they're going to direct one day. I had no such ambitions. But we were shooting an ad, a rather big ad for a big brand in South Africa. And we managed to get Jamie Foxx, the big American star, and it was a big deal. You know, it was quite a coup that time to get Jamie Foxx, the most expensive actor we ever had on our shores, doing an ad. And when we were doing the lengthy negotiations on the phone between LA and New York and Toronto, you know, Jamie did mention once he asked, because the ad is aimed at our Black market, and he asked about whether we understood it. And I said, well, I am Black. You couldn't see me on the phone. And we went with that. It was a bit uneasy. But anyway, they did arrive. We agreed to do the ad. And we're busy shooting on the first day. And he had this massive entourage of his Black lawyer and his Black manager and his Black hairstylist and this and that. And it's like, okay, well, very cool guys. And we just started shooting, and his lawyer walks up to me, Lloyd Exeter, walks up to me. I thought, okay, here's some trouble maybe. And he says to me, are you sure you know that you're doing the right thing for your Black market? I said, yes, Lloyd, I think we know what we're doing. He says, well, your writer, he's white. I thought, okay, here we go. And he says, and your art director, he's white. And I thought, oh, no, I've got to stop this right now. I said, well, I'm Black. And he looks at me and he just bursts out and shouts into my face, you ain't Black. I thought, oh, the studio went quiet. There was just this dramatic silence. Yeah. I panicked, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest, and he burst out laughing. I thought, oh, okay, that's fine. The shoot's not completely ruined. And we went ahead with the shoot. But it stuck with me. That very moment, I decided I had to write a memoir. Not necessarily to get it out there to make a book, but just so for myself, I could understand who I actually was. Maybe I wasn't Black enough. Maybe I wasn't colored enough. Maybe people just saw me as white. And maybe what overshadowed everything was that I began to identify as a creative, not as a color, not as a person, but my vocation or my career. I'm a creative, and that's all I work for, was my, you know, being a great creative. And maybe I put that behind me and maybe hid it to a certain extent, to get ahead in advertising, so to speak. And that's the night I really started writing, trying to understand exactly who I am, where I fit in, or if I actually do fit in at all. There are no answers really in the book. You know, it's a memoir, and I write it as I saw it that time, my memories as a child. So it's not judgmental. It's just the way I saw it. It's not from the point of view of a political activist or a struggle hero. It's just a kid growing up, just thinking there's nothing better, actually, because we never had TV. Remember, the government never had TV in South Africa until 1976. They didn't really want to show us what we were missing, right? It wasn't because of the lack of technology. They didn't want to show us what we were missing. So the story really unfolds. There's no real judgments. But I found as I was writing at the end of each chapter, and it wasn't intentional, I did write a little bit about, oh, I think I understand now what was going on. So it was never planned. I never pre-planned. I'm writing this chapter because I want to conclude it like this. It's only after I wrote, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. That should not have happened. And I do kind of look for answers, like, you know, what's going on here? So it's not really judging people, but, you know, just trying to understand where I come from, what I went through, and if it actually had real significance, because we know we don't just walk through lives and be insignificant. All our lives are significant. So I try to put it in that, but there are still no real answers. And it only goes until 94 when I was first allowed to vote. And that's really what triggered the story. You know, when I was standing in the queue to vote in Mafeking in Botswana, the old Botswana, yes, you heard right. That's where I first voted, you know, and I'm standing in the queue, and you got before the DA, it was the Progressive Party or whatever it was. And you had the ANC and some other parties, and we looked and smiled, and the ANC guys just gave me this look, and I thought, I'm voting for Mandela, right? So it's ANC, but I didn't feel part of it. I wasn't welcome. And I stood in line, I didn't know, oh my goodness, I always thought I'm going to vote Mandela. That's the obvious choice. There's the first time I crossed my mind, maybe I should not be voting there, or should I be voting somewhere else, or I should now really be voting there. So through all those questions, and that's where the story begins. It goes back trying to understand where I fit in.
Wow.
Long story short.
No, I mean, you raise such interesting issues, because the theme for this festival is beyond imaginations, memory, imagination, and conscience. And I mean, many authors have spoken about the fact that, but the first one that comes to mind is Toni Morrison, about how the line between fiction and fact is always blurred, and you see that in memory. I mean, you have in one family, you have 5 different versions of what was happening in a household, because you have, you have different perspectives, you have different experiences. So even the idea of memory itself it blurs the lines between, the truth and the creative imagination. I mean, and the creative imagination also has its own truth.
And it can be spectacular, because I'm just a normal being, and I think it was Professor Jonathan Jansen said, like, it's very normal life that's becomes quite extraordinary, because extraordinary things happen in everyone's lives. If
Absolutely.
you're lucky enough to have the time and the resource to actually write a book, you'll be amazed what you find. Because there was one story in particular, a very short chapter. I think I was like 9 years old or something, and there's 76 riots. Yeah. Johannesburg, so where to? Remember 76, the blood. And in Cape Town, the schools just started going berserk. But now you had, and my mom came home that day before supper, and she got what they call a shambok. It's a long, hard plastic whip, which the white people used to beat us into submission. And my mom, because of beating the students, she got inadvertently hit on the bum, rather expansive bum, and she was moaning about that. We're sitting at the supper table. And my dad wouldn't really allow talk like that, because now we're talking about, it's the riots, and it's the boycotts, and it's Viva and Black Power. And my dad's like, what do you kids know about Black Power? You shut up. This is for grown-ups. Grown-ups is sort of, remember the whole movement started with the schools and the youth, right? You remember June 16th. So all these things, my dad's just saying, like, shut up. And we're like, I'm like the little one, like, yeah, but Black Power, Dad. Like, yo, what do you know about Black Power? You're a child. Leave it to the grown-ups. As he says, leave it to the grown-ups. We hear, we got one of those kitchen windows, which are kind of like higher up and narrower. And we just hear the fence rattling, the side of the house, the fence. And the kids were jumping over our fence, trying to get away from cops. And you just see these little heads bob past our kitchen window. And we're now sitting there with this awful cabbage breedy that my mom used to make. And we're like, what's going on here? And the next thing, we hear the front door slam against the door as it swung open. We never used to lock our doors back in those days. And the door swung open. We just heard these heavy boots, And, we never had a dining room, so you ate in the kitchen. So there's a little table. And in storm, about 5 or 6 of these camo-clad riot squad white policemen.
Wow.
Okay, batons and everything.
You're 9 years old.
Yeah, and they run through our house, and we just sat at the table, myself, my dad, my mom, and my 2 sisters, and we just sit there dumbfounded. They run right through our kitchen, past us, and going to the back door, trying to cut off the kids, and we just say nothing. And after a while, the doors are still swinging and banging. My mom says, "Close the cupboards." That's the only thing she says, because, in colored families at times, the saying was to close cupboards, because when visitors come, you don't want to show off what you have or what you don't. So those were our first white visitors, and my mom shouted, "Close the cupboards," to avoid the embarrassment. And I mean, when I wrote that, I thought, like, no, this is too crazy to be. It's the first time I doubted myself, my memory. I really doubted. I thought, like, Ivan, you're a charlatan. You are making this up. And I read it to my sister, and she added parts. Yes, and then mommy did this. And I said, oh my goodness. So sometimes when you get so deep down, especially old stuff and memories, because we're all creative people, we start, like you say, we blur the lines. What is real and what is not? And if you get so deep into it, you actually don't know anymore, which was a great place for me to be honest.
I mean, immediately what it brings to mind is how ordinary lives find themselves at the center of extraordinary political circumstances, how politics spills into your life literally comes right through your door while you're having dinner, 9 years old, you know,
Yeah.
whether you wanted to or not. I think that's a great segue to come over to Tatiana as well. Thank you so much, Ivan, for sharing that. Tatiana, you are an essayist. You've written 4 novels. You've won the big, you know, São Paulo Prize. Your work deals with identity. It also deals with gender. How did you come to writing? I know you're from Brazil, but you are now based in Portugal, in Lisbon. How did you start writing, and what is it that moved you to start writing, and what are the things that keep coming back in your work that you keep coming back to?
It's also memory.
Yeah.
So I think we can talk a lot about memory today. As a writer, I would say it's my main obsession. A lot, because, as you said, it blurs fiction and facts, and it interests me a lot. But in my first novel, I worked a lot with family memory. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Yes.
Yes. So it interested me a lot, family memory in the heritage sense, the stories we receive from our parents, our grandparents, and even before that. So the stories we hear when we are children, but also stories we don't hear, we don't listen to them. The stories that are not told. Because I think that all the families have a lot of secret stories that, and mainly they are sad stories that we think that if we don't tell them, we don't pass them through the following generations. But I'm sure that these stories, they pass through generations, even if we don't tell them, and mainly if we don't tell them. So I like going through the past to find out these stories. And so in my first novel, The House in Smyrna, the main character, it's a woman who tells the story. She's paralyzed in a bed, and she receives the key of the house of her grandfather in Turkey, in Smyrna. It's a city in Turkey, from where he left and where he never went back. So she makes this trip to Turkey, but actually it's a trip to the past of her family, to all the stories that were not told to her. About immigration, but also about the exile of her parents during the military dictatorship in Brazil. So her mother was arrested and tortured. So she goes back to all these stories, and it's a way of, and it's when she tells the story, she can move again. So she needs to name things. But at the same time, I play with memory and fiction and facts. So that's why memory is so important for me as a writer, and also because of the blanks, because we cannot say everything when we work with memory. We leave a lot of place for the reader to imagine things that happen or that didn't happen, because when we work with memory, we cannot say everything. So I think this is all. It's the main subject of what I write, but it's also the way I write. I write with a lot of blanks, with a lot of blanks, to leave the place for the reader to be part of it.
How do you choose those blanks? That's an interesting. How do you choose what not to say?
I would say that because I write with very small chapters.
Okay.
In a very, it's very cinematographic, my way of writing. So as if I wrote very small scenes, and then it's like I do a kind of montage. I don't know how to say in English.
Yes, you're right. It's a montage, yeah.
So it's more or less like a movie, you know. A movie doesn't show everything.
Sure.
So it's more or less like this. So
sure. Thank you for that. I mean, this idea of historical memory and trauma is very interesting because, you know, in societies that have experienced trauma, sometimes it takes a generation or two to be able to unpack what has happened previously. So you are telling, I mean, it's like you, Ivan, telling your own memoir, but you're speaking as yourself, you know, 30, 40 years ago, right? But and Tatiana, you are speaking about another, you know, generation, right? Or other generations, you know. I mean, it reminds me of even the, you know, the story about the Nigerian Civil War, you know. Sometimes it takes the generation that experiences the trauma keep silent. And it takes time for people to be able to really dig deep and to be able to unpack what actually happened, because you're still busy living, you're living through the trauma, you're working through the trauma, you're trying to make sense of it, you know. The theme for this year, for our conversation, is outracing. So I feel like I need to now at this point make a turn and come back to race. I just wanted to share that there are a number of comments in the chat. Ivan, people really love the title of your book. I think it speaks to a lot of South Africans who are watching. I want to speak a bit about the issues that are currently burning in the countries that we come from, you know, and maybe how this can connect to the work that we do as authors, you know. This concept of outracing, you know, I don't know if it is possible at all to outrace race, you know. I think it's very interesting that we have been chosen from the countries that we have been chosen from here, and that we represent the identities that we represent, you know. As you said, Ivan, you know, colored identity outside of South Africa, people don't understand it, they don't know it, you know. Colored in America is derogatory, but here it is a culture, you know. Tatiana, you know, in my imagination, when I was growing up, we were told that Brazil was this racial utopia. You know, we were told that everybody gets along, the people are intermarrying, white marries black, they're all on the beach enjoying each other, you know. But then, you know, a month ago, they murdered a black man on the beach and there were riots, you know. We saw with Bolsonaro, you know, that this is also a society that is dealing with the rise of the right wing, you know, like the rest of the world is dealing with it, like we are dealing with it in South Africa, you know. And I guess also for Cheluchi, when I think about, even though Nigeria doesn't have the same kind of presence of, like, you know, the post-colonial politics in Nigeria don't look like they do in Brazil and in South Africa. You don't have a large, like, white settler population, you know, but you still have the impact of those politics, you know. And in many ways, like, that is what has shaped the legacies of corruption and violence that we see in Nigeria, which led to, you know, what we saw on Lekki Bridge in 2020, you know. So I guess I'm asking each of you maybe to speak to the role of the author in this moment in history, you know, in interrogating these notions of race. Because they're not simple notions. They're not simple whether you are looking at it through your own eyes, through your own life. They're not simple whether you're looking at it, you know, from an outsider in, So I'd just like each of you to speak to that, and whoever would like to go first is welcome to speak. I mean, also, Cheluchi, I'm aware of the fact that you have you are living in Lagos, but you also have lived in Canada. And there's a huge Nigerian diaspora all over the world. I mean, many of the people who we saw just a few days ago stuck at the border of Poland and the Ukraine are Nigerians, so whoever would like to tackle that animal is welcome.
Okay. So my book, like I said earlier, it ends in 94 when I voted.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think lots of people, if they do read the book, and those out, it looks like, oh, well, it must have been quite a traumatic experience growing up during apartheid, being on the wrong side of apartheid, person of color. And if I think of it now, it's quite and like I joked with you earlier, some people have asked what the next book's going to be about. Not a lot. Not a lot have asked me to write another one. But if I had to, I always say that I'm kind of depressed by the fact that I think that the book that I've just written or recently published, there's a lot of innocence in it and naivety, and it's a child growing up, and actually during apartheid and the struggle years, and even with the death around, it seemed quite an innocent period because it was very simple. It was, excuse the phrase, but black and white. Yeah, we had apartheid. We had a very an enemy that's the enemy to the whole world. It felt like, and there was us, and we on the right side. And we thought 94 came like, it's great. But, not even in our country, but since 94 up to now, there's just more and more racism and strife and clashes of ideas and principles and the right wing, the rise of right. There's so much more. I thought like, oh my God, that should have been the worst time of my life. The first I'm 55 now, and another 27, 28 years later, things are actually almost worse. Yes, we can never kind of belittle what happened, apartheid, like the Holocaust, but what's happening now, I've never felt when I was that age. I knew that's the bad guy, that's a bad thing. Now it's just everywhere.
It's very confusing, yeah.
Every conversation we have that's got to do about race. You have two European, really white nations fighting each other, but it's a color issue. I don't know all over the world, but definitely here in South Africa, we hear about how people are treated at the border, and then on Facebook, social media, now the chatter, and why South Africa as the government, as a country, are not like kind of condemning the war. And there are multiple reasons for that. Yes. I often say, just consider us like the Swiss, you are neutral, but black. So there's always these things, doesn't matter what it is. You go to Trump, it ends up being about race. You talk about the pandemic, ends up being about race. We judge
absolutely
people. Yeah, it's just all the time. And it's not ridiculous a notion either, because, I think too soon did we sweep under the carpet slavery, colonialism, imperialism, all those things, genocides all over Africa, all over America. We've just swept it, we haven't dealt with it. And now that we're raising it, everyone is raising like, oh, shush, it's been a long time ago. It's not a long time ago. We had TV when otherwise issues were still going on in America. And it's still going on, it's still getting worse. So it still is very prevalent. And I don't think we really, really have overcome it and really got to a point where we fully understand it. If anything, I think we're just like really going to get to a head eventually, somehow. Yeah, so it's still a big part of conversation. And that makes it quite a daunting time for a writer to write about these truths and to acknowledge it and find some hope in there, because after all, that's what we do by telling these stories, right? It's to bring hope and the human connection through. So maybe
there's some beautiful comments that are coming from the chat. Valma Faf says, Ivan speaks to the truth of being judged by our outer appearance rather than our ancestry or social heritage. We are not our skin. She also says, the suppressed stories, this makes me think of you, Cheluchi, it also makes me think of you, Tatiana, or actually all three of you. The suppressed stories are the ones we dream or experience. Like ancestral memories suppressed or expressed, it arrives. Like removing paralysis through talking story. Aisha KG says, she has a question directed at you, Tatiana. She says, your own parents are Turkish Jews. So is the house on Smyrna based on fact? And the metaphor of the woman finding her path back from physical illness when she has uncovered her roots and the traumas of her ancestors, does that have any basis in fact? Please unmute.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yes. Everything was based on fact, but only based. And then it's fiction. So it's funny because it was based on my family story, but then I have not anymore. But at the time when the book was published, I had a grand aunt who read the book, and then she said she was disappointed because she thought the book was about our family, and it was not.
That is hilarious. That is so funny. But this is interesting to me as well. It's like, because race can be so deceiving, you know. If you take somebody at face value, what you think they are and what they actually are, and then you look at the journey of a family, I mean, then identity, it becomes explosive. You absolutely cannot put it in a box. I mean, because
Sure.
being Turkish and Jewish, you know, it's and then being an immigrant in Brazil, that identity takes on very different, it becomes a completely different color once you're in Brazil. It's a different color once you are in Europe, you know? So, I mean, this experience alone, I find very fascinating.
And it's a construction. I think an identity is not something solid, and it's something that you construct and you deconstruct and reconstruct all the time. So it's not something that you say, I am like this, and you stay this way your whole life. So
yeah, it's true. It's true. Cheluchi, you know, sometimes when I speak to like Nigerian friends or peers about race, the conversations that I have with Nigerians who are living in Nigeria, and the conversations that I have with Nigerians who have lived or worked outside of Nigeria, two different worlds, sometimes completely different worlds around race, you know, because Nigerians who, and of course I'm generalizing, but for Nigerians who are based in Nigeria, you know, the immediate concerns of oppression are coming from people who are Black like them. You know, it's like us in South Africa, we're looking at a Black government, you know, and everybody around you is Black. The person who's rich is Black. The person who's poor is Black. The policeman who's doing all these messed up things is Black, you know. But then you go outside and all of a sudden you realize what it really means to be Black in a world where white people actually dominate.
I think you capture that paradox so well. So I grew up, and I'm going to tell a little story here. I think I've mentioned my dad before, but we were really grounded in my culture, in Igbo culture, in being Nigerian, and so on and so forth. And then I went to graduate school in Canada. And as many Nigerians, you may have heard us say, you know, you realize all of a sudden, very suddenly, it can be quite shocking that you are Black, right?
All of a sudden.
Because you have, you know, you've been living like you know, very graphically described, with all these other Black people. And in fact, you could, even in Nigeria, you could be living in a specific context where all the people that you relate with and to are from the same ethnic group and all of that. And so going from that to then going outside, trying to interpret things like you speak so well, you know, and understand whether it's a compliment or whether you should be offended, can be quite jarring. And sometimes we speak differently. So you will hear many people in Nigeria who can't quite relate to the African-American experience, for example, who are like, you know, we don't know why they're agitating so much. They should just get on with it and, you know, do life, and so on and so forth. because here we are all almost all the same color, and we struggle with quite a bit of oppression, which is why I always go back to that humanity. I personally, as a writer, I tend to look inwards. I tend to look at, so Nigeria is this big country full of immense potential. Could be, something really extraordinary if we could get our acts straight, as we like to say. But yet, something isn't quite right, isn't working. Of course, that doesn't mean that we're all excited about, xenophobia for South Africa, where we have quite a number of Nigerians living, and we actually, when there are riots and stuff, people get really worried back home. But in the middle of all of that, we find ourselves dealing with our own internal oppressions and the fallout of that. So in my case, it's become really personal. About 3 weeks ago, my father, who I talk about a lot, who was 84, was shot in Anambra. He was shot and he died. Sorry. And all of this, when you look at what transpired, bring to the fore the internal problems and oppressions that we face, articulate, and as able to deal with what, for example, is going on in Ukraine. We talk about it, but we find that the voices of others might even be higher than ours, right? Because yes, there we are, trying to get across the border and people being forced, and then so you have people having those conversations about, if our educational system was as strong as it could be, not we wouldn't all be going off to, God knows where to go to school and things like that. So we have those conversations alongside the conversations about race and about how we feel that we're being, treated by others. So it's sometimes it can be a very confusing mix of things. And so in your book, in writing for me, for example, I am with what has happened to me. There is no way I am going to be talking much, as loudly as some others maybe about those kinds of things on the global stage. As I would about what is happening internally. But the truth, if you look at it, is that all of it, when you look at colonialism, the way we were broken up, the way we were, sort of bandaged together, and all of that, our civil war, all of that has played out in real time, in some of the dilemmas and challenges and oppressions and difficulties we're living with each other that we currently have. And so it's all a big mess that, needs unraveling. And it's sort of like the elephant where people are going to pick different, parts and pieces and describe them while not necessarily getting the whole picture. I think I'm going to leave it at that and let other people speak as well.
What you're saying is very important, that this is actually the role of the arts. This is the role of literature, to be able to hold complexity.
To unpack all of that and to tell the different aspects to these stories, and see the linkages that there are, because there are definitely, without going into a whole history lesson, there are definitely linkages that they don't just happen, the different things that happen. When you talk about our oppressions and who in Nigeria, for example, in terms of the leaderships, you would have heard about people trying to break away and people questioning how, different ethnic groups were brought together, if they have different philosophies and all of that, and whether people should be having referendums and things like that, and whether we should have state police and whether we shouldn't, and all of that, affect people's lives one-on-one, as it has now affected my family very, very directly. And so as writers, we have to, it's that unpacking, and obviously we can only unpack from our own lens, our own perspectives, with the hope that we can see, through our stories, the different aspects of these things, and hopefully begin to make a better world, if there's any such thing.
My condolences. Well, the world is better for having your creativity in it, you know. Condolences on the death of your father in this season of tremendous loss in our world. You know, I wish your family strength, and I look forward to the ways in which your creativity will give meaning to much of this, because I think that's what we do, you know, as creatives. We use, you know, the tragedies and the events of our lives and what happens around us to give meaning to life, and in so doing we give meaning to others, you know. And on that note, I want to come to Tatiana and ask you about your latest book. I mean, apart from race, you know, the one of the core identity issues that is exploding and has been exploding in this fourth wave of feminism that we are in is gender. You know, your fourth book deals with rape, which is a hugely topical issue, particularly in South Africa. You know, we have some of the highest rape statistics in the world. The gender-based violence has become a major area of focus, especially since 2020, you know, since the hard lockdown of COVID, when, you know, so many parts of the world saw gender-based violence just skyrocketing when people were locked in the house, you know. But your book deals with an incident of sexual violence that took place during the Olympics in Rio, you know, which were touted as, you know, the hugely successful Olympics. Everybody wanted to be in Rio. My sister went to Rio for the Olympics, you know. So please tell us about this book, and why did you choose to write this? And what is, I mean, rape is such a huge, emotional, evocative, charged, triggering issue. What was your entry point into this subject?
Well, Brazil and South Africa have a lot in common, I think.
Very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And before answering this question, I was thinking that when you talked about racism in Brazil, I was thinking that I went to school in a left-wing private school, medium class, and I learned the same thing you taught about Brazil. That everything I learned that in the school, you know. But I look around me, and everyone was white in the whole school. There was one black girl. And my parents, left wing, very revolutionary. They have a lot of friends. 2, 3 were black. I went to the restaurants, to the cinema, to the movie theater. No black people. Only the black people were serving the tables, were selling the tickets. So it's very schizophrenic, because we learned that in Brazil we are mixed, black people marry white people, we are not racist, but at the same time it's very strange, because in a way we were kind of blind, because how we couldn't see that we were not that. And with Lula, it changed a lot, because a lot of people who before that could not go to the university went to the university with the quotas. I don't know how to say, because they open a lot of place only for black people in the universities.
Oh, so like something like affirmative action, like trying to push for more black people to be at university, because it was the statistics were crazy. It was something like only 1% of the people in universities in Brazil were black.
Yes, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So now there are a lot of black writers, for example, black philosophers. So things are changing a lot. Even if we have Bolsonaro at the opposite side, I think it's the black movement is very strong now. So I'm not in the place to talk about it. I'm not the right person to say it, but just to tell a little bit. So moving subject, my novel.
Thank you for sharing that and for giving us that context. We appreciate it.
My novel.
So I'll come to you just now, Ivan. I would like for Tatiana to finish speaking about the latest novel.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
So just 2 minutes. The title is Vista Chinesa. It's the name of the place where my best friend was raped in 2014 when she was running. And it was a very, very violent rape with a gun. And it took a lot of time. It was really violent. And
sure.
Some years later, I decided to write a book about it, and I asked her if she was okay about it, and she said yes. And I interviewed her about it, and she talked a lot, as she didn't do it at the time she was raped. And I wrote a novel. That is a letter of a woman telling her children, also because it's the story of trauma, and telling her children a trauma that happened to her. It's a way of healing. It's not, I don't like the word healing here, but kind of not repeating it with them, because they were born after, not from the rape, but after, not from the rape, but
but later,
so in that body, they grew in that body that was raped before. So that had this memory. So it's something that when you were raped, I think that in a way you were raped every day. You are not raped once. A trauma is something that happens every day,
because of memory.
Yes, it is repeated every day. It's not that something that remains in the past. It repeats all the time. And I think that women in Brazil, like women in South Africa, like women everywhere, but more in some place, we are very afraid of being raped. So I have this fear with me. And when it happened with someone very close to me, I decided that I had to write about it, because it was a very strong feeling, and I wanted to speak out.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very important, and to leave these ideas also resonating in the room. That is very true. When you've experienced that kind of trauma, it stays with you. It lives in the body. It impacts your relationships afterwards, your intimate relationships with the people that you love, and sometimes we're not aware of these things. And the real lived day-to-day fear that many women, queer people carry because of that trauma. Ivan, you wanted to say something, and then I want to move over to the chat and then close, because we've, imagine 55 minutes gone by, boom.
Oh no, it's gone down so quickly. I just wanted to raise one thing, which is quite interesting.
Please do.
And before we started, when we were still offline, we were talking, someone was talking about publishing and how we got our books published and things like that.
Yes. It was
yeah, because when I was still in the beginning stages of the book, or halfway through, the publisher asked, like, so who's the market, right, for the book? And I'm like, is it colored people? Is it colored people? I said, no, it's for people. Okay, so people. The story is about a person. Okay, it's not. I didn't want an echo chamber where we just let's be colored people and reminisce about the good old days being a colored. There are lots of really great colored writers who write about things, and they're very popular, especially in Cape Town. But I didn't just want a sounding board just to like remind me where I am. I wanted to be part of something bigger. And it also brings to mind the question about like how much colonialism is good, because the way I sound, you know, to me now, I think maybe it's a problem, because when we were kids, you know, we lived in Belgravia State and we spoke mixed languages, English, but my parents, when they spoke, my mom spoke my dad, they only spoke in Afrikaans. You know, I must remember being colored in Afrikaans makes you quite low ranking, because you're almost talking the boss's language, the Baaskap thing, you know, and you're from like a lower sort of class. So they encouraged us to speak English, sort of Queen's English. And remember, we got brought up, you know, with English literature and comics, Beano, Topper, Dandy, yeah. We thought the Queen was amazing, yeah. We watched Princess Di get married, for goodness sake. So we were anglicized in that sort of way. And we also knew that if you spoke English, especially as a colored person, there's a better chance of you maybe just moving ahead and out of the Cape Flats and out of the suburbs and into white business. So that is a colonial remnant, you know, the way I speak. And obviously, because of the book's title, people often ask, you know, you can't be colored because you speak so well. It is something, but is it all that bad? Now I think it's really bad. All things colonial. Me back in Tottenham Hotspur in London, it's bad. I've been colonized, you know, but how much, surely not all colonization in a way is bad if it's still within you, because then I'm calling me bad, right? Because of the
yeah.
Are there some parts of colonialism that is okay, that we can get with? Maybe not 2 doses, maybe not a booster shot of colonialism, but maybe 1 shot.
That's so funny.
Something, because, you know, we all did that, and lots of people all over this country had to kind of find a way to uplift themselves, and we had to kind of adapt things and change things. And it'd be sad if we're all seen as turncoats or traitors, you know? How much is allowed? How much is acceptable, you know, to get further?
This is one of it speaks to what the late poet laureate of South Africa used to say. He used to say, you can't unscramble the colonial egg. In other words, you know, the chomors, the mixture that has been made. How do you, a scrambled egg can never go back to its original parts, or what it was, the egg and the yolk and the shell. It's done. That phase is done. So this is what has happened to us. You know, we've been scrambled, and then what happens? And I think, you know, as has been said many times in this conversation, only art can answer those questions. Cheluchi, I want to come to you very quickly because I think we only have a minute left or so to speak about. Ivan raised the issue of publishing. I'd like you to talk about publishing in South Africa. You know, I mean, we are notoriously Afrophobic and violent towards our African neighbors, you know, but at the same time, there's also interesting pockets of possibility that exist on our continent, and many of the most radical spaces of hybridity, of the expansive spaces where new identities are possible, are creative spaces. So, I mean, your book was published here, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take a minute. Like I said, I'd written this book, you know, taking an internal look at Nigeria. And the question was, who was going to want to listen to or read a book about this place, the setting, the women I was trying to describe, and so on and so forth. Whether it was universal, that language again, and so on, as if being human is not already sufficiently universal.
Exactly.
You know, and so that was a concern. I tried to find an agent. That was very difficult. But I think, you know, again, looking internally, you know, different challenges and difficulties with publishing in Nigeria, on the continent itself, and so on and so forth, kind of reared its head. And it was strange and amazing and wonderful at the same time that it was published by Penguin in South Africa. Was picked up before I got a Nigerian publisher, before it then went out into the world and all of that. And that always brings me back to how do we get to become good enough so that we are able to be recognized and accepted, and our stories accepted. And maybe that also goes back to race and all of that. And yes, there are big people, big some of us that are big and doing things on the world stage, but how many of us in comparison to the rest of, the world, the rest of all the writing that is out there. And so I think, more and more, obviously, publishers tell me Nigerians are doing well. So we're all, and I mean around the world, where people are beginning to say we need to have one Nigerian on our roster. And so on. But I look at that a bit cynically. I'm a bit cynical about that because, again, it goes to that question of, are we human enough to have our stories be told and be accepted, just like stories from just about anywhere else? And yeah, so my all the publishers I've had, both in Canada, London, for example, has been pretty amazing. But you just want that to become become just that much more widespread. Now we talk about own voices and all of that, but there's still a lot of push that needs to be done, to make that better. And of course, I can't get into all the politics of why publishing on the continent isn't as vibrant as it could be, but even that needs, looking into in and of itself.
Well, certainly with the brilliant and diverse voices that we've had this evening, it just shows that our experiences are not homogenous, but they are human and they are articulate. They speak well for themselves, and they're complex and rich. And they're worthy of interrogation. They're not just issues of the past or of history, but they're issues of the future. I'd like to close with a comment from one of our viewers who's been watching via Facebook. Firstly, Aisha KG, for you, Tatiana, she says, I love The House in Smyrna, by the way. Is there an English version of the latest book, the one on rape, yet? I'll answer on your behalf. Yes, Aisha, that book is coming out. You said the English version is coming out in August, ne? Okay, in August. And then a beautiful comment from Janine Pretorius, who's been watching the whole way and commenting the whole way. She says, I think race is so dominant because of the extent to which we've been suppressed as a people for so long. As you said, Lebo, it can take generations. How we give expression to it in all its variants is complex but necessary. Our voices, our trauma, all of it should be heard if we are to reimagine. And I want to congratulate you and thank you for the ways in which you are reimagining these narratives. It's been my absolute pleasure to meet with you and to facilitate this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we bid farewell and say thank you to Cheluchi Onyemelukwe-Onuobia from Nigeria, author of The Son of the House; Ivan Johnson, author of Memoir of a South African Identity Crisis, also known as He Speaks So Well; and Tatiana Salem Levy, author of The House in Smyrna, in addition to 3 other novels, essays, and children's books. I wish you continued success in your creative endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lebo. Thank you.
Thank you.